Welcome to Freedom Press. All right, folks, buckle up because we're about to solve the mystery of the decade. How did Donald Trump, the guy everyone wrote off after 2020, waltz back into the White House in 2024? Spoiler alert, it wasn't the TikTok kids or the gray-haired boomers who sealed the deal. It was Generation X, those scrappy, sarcastic survivors of the 80s and 90s who grew up on MTV, mixtapes, and a healthy dose of skepticism. Today, we're diving deep, way deep, into why Gen X was the secret weapon of this election, how Trump cracked their code, and why conservatives better not sleep on them. This isn't just a story about votes. It's about a generation that's been ignored too long finally saying, enough is enough. So grab a coffee or a Mountain Dew if you're feeling nostalgic, and let's roll. Let's kick things off with the cold, hard facts. According to the Associated Press exit polls, voters age 45 to 64, that's prime Gen X territory, went for Trump over Kamala Harris, 52% to 46%. That's a 6-point margin, folks, and it's bigger than the measly 3-point edge Trump got from boomers. Meanwhile, Gen Z and millennials, they either slept through Election Day or split their votes like a bad breakup. Gen X didn't just vote. They showed up in droves, shifting a whopping 9 points toward Trump since 2020. 9 points. That's not a trend, that's an earthquake. Business Insider backs this up, noting Gen X flipped harder than any other group. And in swing states like Arizona, KJZZ reported 52% of that 45-64 bracket went red. This wasn't a fluke, it was a Gen X power play. So who are these Gen Xers anyway? Born between 1965 and 1980, they're the latchkey kids of America, left home alone while their boomer parents chased the American dream or dealt with divorce court. They're the generation that traded babysitters for The Simpsons, swapped rotary phones for Atari, and watched the Berlin Wall crumble on grainy TVs. Now in their late 40s to late 50s, they're the sandwich generation, raising teens while worrying about their aging folks. They're not the preachy boomers with their Woodstock nostalgia or the selfie-obsessed Gen Z with their TikTok dances. They're the ones who learned early that life's tough and you've got to fend for yourself. Pew Research calls them the forgotten middle child. And boy, did they remind us they're still here in 2024. Let's get into the Gen X psyche. These folks aren't your flag-waving optimists. They're cynics with a capital C. Think Seinfeld energy. Nothing's sacred, everything's fair game. And if you can't take a joke, that's your problem. National Review hit the nail on the head. They're the generation that's had it with political grandstanding and sanctimonious lectures. They don't trust anyone, government, corporations, even their neighbors half the time. Slate says they've got a healthy disdain for authority, forged in an era of Watergate fallout and corporate greed. They're not here to march in lockstep. They'd rather drive over the parade than join it. And that attitude? It's why they vibed with Trump's chaos over Harris's polished promises. What does Gen X love? Freedom. Raw, unfiltered freedom. They grew up in an era where you could ride your bike without a helmet, say what you thought without a cancel bomb, and drink from a garden hose without a safety warning. Washington Examiner nails it. They crave self-reliance and tolerance, not handouts or finger-wagging. They're the generation that worshiped back to the future and Top Gun, stories of guts and glory. And don't sleep on their love for irony, Trump's brash, over-the-top style. That's their 80s action hero swagger in political form. They're not into utopian promises. They want a world where they can breathe, work, and laugh without someone policing their every move. Now, what sets Gen X off? Oh, where do we start? Censorship tops the list. They can't stand the progressive obsession with speech codes, trigger warnings, or forcing correct pronouns down their throats. NPR's got data showing they're done with being labeled bigots for cracking a joke or questioning the narrative. They despise the nanny state. Think Biden's lockdowns, school closures that left their kids zooming into oblivion, and inflation that's turned their grocery runs into a horror movie. They hate a society that's gone soft, where every kid gets a trophy and every opinion needs a disclaimer. It's not just dislike, it's a visceral, get off my lawn disgust that's been brewing since the 90s. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Gen X is mad, capital M, capital A, capital D. Political writer Philip Klein says they've been simmering for decades, watching their 80s freedoms get chipped away by bureaucrats and busybodies. They're angry at elites who live in ivory towers, at a culture that's traded grit for glitter, and at social norms that feel like a straitjacket. It's not the loud, screaming anger of a protest march. It's a quiet, seething, whatever, never mind vibe that Nirvana bottled up and Gen X carried into adulthood. Scientific American says they're stressed, middle-aged, overworked, underappreciated. That anger didn't just simmer in 2024. It boiled over, and Trump was the pressure valve. So, how did Trump win over this prickly bunch? Let's start with the wallet. Gen X grew up in Reagan's America. Low taxes, booming jobs, a sense that a hard work paid off. Fast forward to 2024, and Business Insider says they're the least financially secure generation, sandwiched between college loans for their kids and medical bills for their parents, all while Biden's inflation made eggs cost more than a car payment. Trump's Make America Great Again wasn't just a catchy line. It was a time machine back to the 80s, when a paycheck stretched and the future felt bright. AEI's data shows his tax cut promises and America First economics hit Gen X right in the nostalgia sweet spot. Next up, the culture game. Trump's a walking irony machine, and Gen X can't get enough. AEI's Christopher Scalia calls it. He's the guy who says what everyone's thinking but won't dare whisper. His over-the-top jabs at the establishment, his politically incorrect zingers, that's pure Gen X catnip. They grew up on The Simpsons and Beavis and Butthead. They don't clutch pearls when Trump mocks the woke crowd. They laugh their heads off. Washington Examiner says this cultural fit was key, where Harris played it safe, Trump played it raw, and Gen X said, "That's our guy." Trump's outsider cred was the clincher. Gen X has zero love for the suits in D.C. or the talking heads on cable news. Pew Research says they've distrusted institutions since the 70s. Medium calls Trump a wrecking ball to the status quo, and Gen X saw him as their middle finger to the system. His media strategy was genius too. He ditched the Sunday shows for Joe Rogan, TikTok, even X Spaces. That's where Gen X hangs out, not on PBS. Harris stuck to legacy media, preaching to the choir, while Trump met Gen X on their turf. It wasn't even a contest. Don't overlook this angle. Gen X is the family generation. AEI's Timothy Carney points out they got married, had kids, and built lives, unlike millennials who delayed it or Gen Z who's still figuring it out. They're not glued to Twitter wars. They're coaching Little League and paying mortgages. Trump's tax cuts, his promises to bring back manufacturing jobs, his focus on law and order. That's their language. Biden's school closures during COVID, the cultural chaos of defund the police riots. That hit Gen X parents where it hurt. Deseret News says Trump's stability pitch won them over, big time. Let's nerd out on the data for a sec. Marist polls pre-election showed Gen X had a 62% disapproval rating for Harris, higher than any other group. Washington Examiner pegs their Trump vote at 53% nationwide. Substack crunched the numbers. Gen X went +8 for Trump, a massive swing from 2020's razor-thin margin. And it's not just white dudes. Deseret News highlights Trump's gains with Latino and Black Gen Xers, especially men who felt the economic pinch hardest. This wasn't a narrow win. It was a broad, ticked-off coalition saying, F you. Here's the big takeaway for conservatives. Gen X is your golden ticket. They're not the loudmouths, boomers and Gen Z steal the headlines, but they're the workhorses. National Review says they're the swing vote that can lock in GOP victories for a decade. They're in their prime, running businesses, raising families, shaping communities. Politico calls them safely Republican now, but only if you keep them engaged. They're not ideologues, they're pragmatists. Give them results, and they'll stick around. Fumble it, and they'll ghost you faster than a bad 90s blind date. Think about their clout. Gen X isn't posting manifestos on X. They're too busy living. But they vote, and they vote hard. Newsweek says older generations, including Gen X, outperformed expectations in 2024. They're the silent majority conservatives dream of, reliable, no nonsense, and allergic to fluff. PRRI data shows they're trending toward traditional values, not progressive experiments. If the GOP keeps them fired up, they're a firewall against blue waves. Lose them, and you're stuck begging millennials to put down their avocado toast and show up. Trump wrote the manual on winning Gen X. He didn't lecture them. He provoked them. He didn't promise a perfect world. He promised jobs and freedom. Montclair.edu says his independent streak mirrored their own. He leaned into their cynicism, turning it into a rallying cry. The system's broken, and I'll fix it. Conservatives need to steal that page. Be bold, be real, ditch the polished talking points. Gen X doesn't want a sermon. They want a fighter. Trump gave them one, and it worked. Okay, let's play devil's advocate. Some folks, like Philip Bump at the Washington Post, say Gen X isn't that Trumpy. They argue boomers and the silent generation still lean harder right, and Gen X just followed the pack. Fair point. Older voters did go red too. But here's the rebuttal. Gen X's 9-point shift from 2020 to 2024 was the game changer. Boomers barely budged, and Gen Z flaked. Washington Post's own data shows people age 45-64 was the most pro-Trump bracket. Gen X didn't tag along, they drove the bus. What's next? Gen X isn't fading, they're peaking. With J.D. Vance as VP, a millennial who gets their vibe, they're bridging the gap to the next generation. NBC News says Gen X has grown more conservative over time, and 2024 proved it. They're the GOP's backbone now, not just a footnote. Conservatives who keep them in the fold, through jobs, freedom, and a little rebellious spirit, can dominate. Ignore them, and you're handing the keys to the left. Gen X isn't done flexing. So, there you have it, folks. Generation X, the sarcastic, angry, freedom-obsessed crew, gave Trump the White House in 2024. They're not here for the woke circus, the elite lectures, or the endless promises. They're here for results, and Trump delivered, economically, culturally, unapologetically. They're the forgotten generation that remembered how to fight back, and conservatives better not forget them again. This is the story of how the kids of the 80s became the kingmakers of the 2020s. If you dug this deep dive, smash that like button, subscribe to Freedom Press, and drop a comment below. Are you Gen X? Did Trump win you over? What's your take? Let's keep this conversation rolling. Hit that bell so you don't miss our next one. This is Freedom Press signing off. Stay free, stay loud. See you soon.